Anyone
Do you-
else?
Stop point.
Sorry, no,
Anyone that doesn't, he says, shall I introduce myself?
I know who you are.
Yes, he's
I'll
not.
just-
Just
It's
give
just-
us some background.
He doesn't do this thing.
Does he?
No,
Helen's not out.
Does he?
I talk.
Like you said, he's a special
Right.
speaker.
Do you want us to put her in the car?
Yes. Well, hello everybody. Right. I was Secretary of the Royal Commission of Ancient Monuments in Aberystwyth for 14 years, from 1991. And before that, I worked for English Heritage. And before I transferred to the Royal Commission, because it's more or less part of the same family in the civil service, I was head of the team of inspectors who list historic buildings in England. So for about 4 years, every building that got listed in England had to have my signature on a bit of paper. Now that's quite an onerous job, but it does mean that you have to be able very quickly to read buildings, because that's what the job is, particularly if you're involved in it but with a team of inspectors who are working with you. And before that, I looked after castles and ancient monuments, so for about nearly 40 years I was either an inspector or I was down here as head of the Royal Commission. So that's my background, but the other bit of my background, which is relevant to this, is that I was born and brought up in a seaside resort. And over the years, since I was an undergraduate, I've interested myself in the development of seaside resorts. And the one I was brought up in happens to be a very successful one, Eastbourne. Of course, visited, as a matter of course, from quite a young age, places like Brighton, Hastings, Worthing, wherever on the south coast, Bournemouth. So, what I'm going to talk about this evening, and why I've proposed this interesting subtitle, is because Aberystwyth was almost unique for better than 100 years as the only seaside resort that had a university as well. The other one was St Andrews in Scotland, which of course is very different in character from Aberystwyth in a whole number of ways, not least because the university there was founded in the Middle Ages. So this is a topic which is interesting, because whenever you read any of the material about Aberystwyth, people keep comparing it to places like Brighton, and they could hardly be more different from the word go, until, well, not quite from the go, until you get back into the 18th century. My starting point is in 1933, when, of course, motoring was becoming very much something that the middle classes were becoming involved with, and they wanted to know what they were driving around and looking at, and they were driving into more places. And a number of us will remember in the 50s, for example, the Shell guides, which helped motorists sort of find their way to the interesting things in the countryside. Well, in the 30s, H.V. Morton wrote a whole series of books called In Search of, and in his In Search of Wales, he wrote, "Aberystwyth is leading a double life. It is not the simple seaside town praised on the railway posters. Behind its hotels and boarding houses, its pretty hills, its inadequate pier, and its half moon of blue-grey shingle is something even more important than holidays. It is the oldest university town in Wales." Well, of course, that's not true. But the point he's making is that there's this double life in Aberystwyth. There's Seaside Resort, which is sort of cogging along, and then there's a university, which is actually really quite important. And he's writing this at a time, and we have to keep reminding ourselves of key dates in the course of what I'm going to say. One of the key dates is 1938, because until 1938, by law, nobody got holidays with pay. law was passed in 1938 providing for that, although of the 18 odd million people who were considered to be working people at that time, in fact, quite a large proportion of them, well into the millions, had arrangements with their employers and so on, so they could have time off, or indeed it was inconvenient for their employers to have time off. So if you worked, for example, in a textile mill in Lancashire or Yorkshire, you jolly well had to have time off because they closed the mill so they could maintain the machinery, and you had to clear off somewhere, and you may as well clear off to Blackpool on a trip organised with the people you work with, or possibly even by your company, as do anything else. Now, that's the sort of starting point for what I'm going to say. But we've got to go back. We're going to put it onto slideshow. And come on. See what's happened here. Sorry. See, the trouble with having my varifocals on. It's just on PowerPoint. I'll carry on talking if you can get the picture of Scarborough to come up. There we go. Thank you. That's it. We have to go back a very, very long way to see the origins of sea bathing. And the whole business of sea bathing starts in parallel with people's realisation that taking water and being in water can be medicinal. And it goes back, in fact, until as far back in Scarborough, believe it or not, to 1687, when a Dr. Whitty actually recommended that for certain conditions you should take the waters at Scarborough. And one of the earliest representations of people taking the waters anywhere was a couple of engravings dating from the 17th.
Sorry, I'm just trying to.
Oh yeah, thanks.
Stop you tripping.
From the 17. The 17. I'll carry on talking. The 1730s and 40s, and at Scarborough, we actually have a picture of people bathing in the sea using bathing machines. And here, when the picture comes up, you will see half a dozen bathing machines. And so there are two people now. The chap who actually made the engraving was much more interested in the castle, and it's a series of engravings made about castles, except that for some reason it
It
is.
should pop back up again, shouldn't it?
Yes, that one, those cables came up, didn't it? Let's see if we can. Fire it up again. Found a very strange. No, I'm getting it on here, but I'm not getting it on there. No.
I've got the plug in the side there.
We need to see the next one after that. We've got to get it clear. That little light is on white now. The one on the back of the projector, when it was actually working, it was green. Has it paused itself or something? That little light on the left.
What does that say?
Press power key.